Welcome to the Embodiment podcast. This show is for you if you see the body as more than a brain taxi. It's for people interested in coming home to the body as a holistic aspect of who we are and how we live. Episodes contain practical tips, exercises you can take away, and interviews with embodiment specialists from around the world. I'm your host, Mark Walsh. So on the show today, Melissa Tofton. So Melissa Tofton works with Tantra. She's a yogi, and she's got her own brand of sex-positive leather accessories for all things interesting, sexy, and fun. I think this is going to be a fun one. Melissa, welcome.
Hello.
Hello. So we first met in a yoga studio in London where everyone was sort of shiny, kind of happy, normal-looking yogis, and then in comes this girl, this tall girl with jet black hair, kind of like Cruella de Vil, lies out this black mat, and is there with these tattoos. And I thought, wow, this person's a bit different. I want to say hello to them. So I ended up chatting to you afterwards and making friends. And now you're in Berlin, though, right?
Yes, hello. I like that a lot. That was a very good introduction.
Welcome. I got a great first impression of you. So how did you get interested in the body in all these different ways? What's your story with this?
Yeah, I think the mind has a really good way of telling tricks. And I think we spend a lot of our early life feeling like, I mean, there's this higher authority. I've got a teacher in school that tells me the way that I should think. And there's always this outside influence of authority and there's always this seeking help from the outside. And then I feel like when we drop into our body and we do something that's anything that's body orientated, it's regaining power back. And just dropping into the body and finding the answers just within your body. Feels really good.
How did you get interested in that? Now, if I remember rightly, you were originally interested in horses, and that got you interested in leather gear, and then it got interesting.
How did you remember that? Yeah, horses. I was a saddler for a while. I was making saddles. I was making saddles for horses, and then my first kind of fetish client that I had was somebody that wanted a saddle for a human. So it was quite a literal transfer from one skill to a different world. So that's where that comes from.
Okay, so you make what could be called, and tell me, I'm not so good on the terminology here, so sort of kink wear, very beautiful kind of leather harnesses for humans, all kinds of, I follow your Instagram and there's always these beautiful pictures on there. It's really sort of work of art that you produce, but very much around the kind of kink scene. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I would say, it's kind of taking the idea of fetish and kink, and bondage and all of these worlds, all of these ideas, and taking them from the dark room, from a darker place where things are hidden, and bringing them into the light, which gives them less darker energy and brings them into a place of just like self-actualization and embodiment and Well,
why don't we talk about kind of kink a little bit, because I think you're the first person we've had on who's kind of in that world. And I'm fairly innocent, not entirely, but fairly innocent. And I imagine our kind of listeners will be the full spectrum, people that have got sort of zero idea what that means. They might have some sort of stereotyped image of a fetish club, right through to people who are sort of deep into it. So, what is that scene? What is it all about? Now you're in Berlin, of course, which is one of the centers of it, as I understand it.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like I'm in the belly of the beast with BDSM here, because I feel like I came to Berlin with this idea of what kink was, that it was this kind of sexy thing that people did at like a dark nightclub, and it just added an extra element to your relationship with your lover or whatever. And then when I came to Berlin, and I really experienced quite a different side of it. I think, what to say about kink? I feel like, I feel it's quite interesting being in Berlin and being at the epicenter of kinkness. And there's a lot of people that just have it as a general kind of recipe in their daily lives, and it doesn't feel like it's as special as it is in England, because it's not as taboo. And with that being around people that see it as less of a darker taboo topic, enables me to open up the conversation about kink just as a form of self-expression, rather than it being this loaded, heavy topic, which it is difficult to unpack that topic with in England. It's I don't know why that is, but yeah, I'm happy to think about it.
Okay. Yeah. So why do you want to take this topic seriously? Because I think there's a lot the embodiment world can learn from the world of kink. So talking to, I have a cousin who's super into it, and just talking to him, I was really impressed with, like, for example, the orientations around consent. So it seems like the world has just started talking about consent in a big way, generally, but this is something, in yoga, I've often talked about kind of like, adjusting people without consent and things like that. But this is a huge topic in the kink world, right? And a very experienced group of people.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. This is a big one. I feel, people, consent is really important, because consent is not just a tool for navigating better sex. That's not even what it is about, really. When you start unpacking consent and getting really into it, and there's this thing called the wheel of consent, which is just a wonderful tool to start looking at when thinking about consent and thinking about the different ways of communicating with someone about what you want to get from an experience. Beginning to navigate consent is not just about navigating something in the bedroom. It begins this conversation with yourself of, like, what is it that I want to experience in life, and how can I clearly communicate myself and actually arrive in the world in a more clear and kind, in a real, more bolder way, like without fear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I've come across the wheel of consent and kind of tantra courses and really liked that. And it was kind of very obvious to me that people that had looked at this scene really took this quite seriously. And I know that a lot of people's first exposure to this scene in kind of modern times is that god-awful book 50 Shades of Grey, and that kind of consent in that is done very badly by all accounts. And some of my sort of real kind of hardcore kink friends are really pissed with that book.
For sure. What the fuck? There's this chapter in the book, right, where there's a scene that's happening, that's unfolding, and it's a scene of high intensity, and the protagonist is experiencing something that's very kinky, that's quite, almost like borderline abusive. And he's doing something to her, and she's saying her code word, which is the word that you would use when you want something to stop happening to you.
This is a safety word that you use in kink. So if something goes too far, you say bananas or whatever it is, and then that's it,
Yeah, exactly. And with, this word this is vital. This is enable safety, and she's using her safety word to get out of the situation, for things to stop happening to her. And then he penetrates her with his finger, and he tells her that she's wet, and he gives that. He says that he uses that as a reason for justification of continuing to do the thing. Yeah. And that terrifies me, that somebody might have that someone who is not aware of consent could have read, because they could have read that chapter and thought, well, that's, if I'm turned on, if there's something physically happening to me, then it must be because I like it.
And also that could be just a protective mechanism, can't it? I mean, I don't want to go too dark too quickly or this with, I don't know, kind of people listening and getting some hardcore territory, but that, certainly is potentially just a protective mechanism. And I've heard from abuse survivors, for example, that there can be physiological arousal when it's the last thing somebody wants in the world. So, that's pretty worrying. So let me play devil's advocate a bit here, because again, many people that haven't seen the sensitivity and the psychological sophistication of the scene might say, and this was my view of it up till probably about 4 or 5 years ago, was like, okay, so people are hurting each other. They must be sick psychologically. There must be mean people who want to hit each other, or they must be kind of weird people who want to be tied up. That's a weird thing to want. No healthy person could want to be spanked or to be or to do the spanking. I'm this vanilla, obviously, but what would you respond to that if you're kind of, you were talking to someone in the street and you had all your tattoos covered and they thought you were a respectable girl, Melissa, and they told you that was that was their perspective on kink, what would you say to them?
Thank you for the question. What would I say to that person? I'd say it looks really horrible from the outside, but it's actually very lovely, and it's very kind and soft, and I think BDSM is just a really awesome tool for realizing a lot of your it's a wonderful tool for self-actualization, for realizing what you actually put into the world and how you want to communicate yourself. If you do it right. And I think there are people out there that are perhaps kind of inspired by the more glamorous image of BDSM. This somebody having something quite horrible happening to them, and somebody being tied up, and why would you want that to happen to you? And I think there's a lot of like bad stuff happening in this world for sure. And there's a lot of beautiful stuff happening at the edge of this, something that feels slightly painful, something that feels on the edge of comfort is it's a really beautiful place to be, to do a lot of self-work on this edge of what feels comfortable and what feels normal.
Yeah, I mean, it occurred to me that people in that world have to do consent well, is the first thing. And then, when it came to the kind of, I was quite surprised when I started looking at this and tried some things, or talked to a lot of other people that tried a lot more. And there's a lot of love in it, because there has to be a huge amount of trust. If I'm going to trust someone to tie me up or vice versa, that's a hugely intimate thing to allow that, and to be like, hey, I know you're not actually going to abuse me in this situation where you really could. So, I mean, that's what struck me about it, is the amount of sort of love and trust and intimacy involved in it.
Totally. And I believe, and there's no real coincidence why there's such a strong community that usually holds. There's a lot of BDSM communities, because everybody kind of has to communicate if they want to go somewhere transformative with this work. And it's a really beautiful tool to use. And I think, and it's not until you actually go deep, it's not until you actually have a positive experience with it that you realize that it is about trust. And it's, one of my closest friends is a professional dominatrix, and I guess on the outside you could say she gets paid for being horrible to men. And and it's, I don't know anybody with more of a nurturing, empathic essence, and I feel like this is quite required. I
had a girlfriend who was a professional spanker. She was kind of on the streets and decided she didn't want to go into kind of sex work as a prostitute, but was offered a job in a club as a professional spanker, and she made a living from that. And she was the sweetest, nicest person. This was in America actually, years ago. She's the sweetest, nicest person that I'd ever been around. And it was very interesting. That's the line of work she'd go in. And I think it's because people trusted her. They kind of felt safe with her. So many people that listen to this are facilitators, and things like feeling safe, trust. These are the daily bread of any kind of transformative teacher, whether it's dance or yoga or whatever it is. And it's really on the surface in this work, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like it's when I'm facilitating an experience to someone, which is what you do with BDSM, you're in service to someone, even though it looks on the outside, it kind of looks like someone's just doing whatever they want. With somebody who's submissive. Actually, what is happening is that the person on top, let's say, is in service to the experience who's in a way, I mean, I've heard this said many times, the sub is the one really in control in that situation. And as you say, there's this service orientation as well. I get it confused with top and bottom and who's what, but this certainly, it's not quite what it immediately appears, is it, to people in terms of where the power is? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I feel like that to me is really important as well. If there's somebody receiving something, I need to know that person is able to communicate when it's not good for them anymore, or when it feels painful, or if I'm tying somebody up in rope and if they're not able to communicate that something feels too tight for them, then it's dangerous for me to engage in that scene with them. So it's absolutely about communication.
Yeah. Okay, and then let's sort of connect this to some of the other embodied practices, because you do this work, and you're an artist performer around it, but you're also fairly hardcore yogi, right? I mean, when I met you, certainly you had the anterior deltoids of someone who'd done a lot of chaturanga dandasana. Yeah, you can't see now, she's flexing her muscles on the camera. Those of you who are listening to the podcast, you're missing a treat here. So I mean, you've done a fair bit of yoga practice as well, right?
Yeah, it's funny because since we met, I've kind of I've sidelined yoga a little bit more since I've gotten more into dance. Because I got a little bit allergic to. I loved Ashtanga yoga. I loved this military kind of approach to yoga. I could feel it in my bones. I loved it when I got something right, and it's been really cool to step away from yoga because I was using it it was more like I was using my body as a tool. And I felt like that was a really important move to make, of looking at what I was doing from an accomplishment addiction perspective. And, and actually what does my soul want? Like what feels expressive to me? So now I just kind of sideline yoga, and I don't really know whether I can call it yoga because I'm just doing what feels intuitive, and it looks more like dance.
Sure. So this is the classic sort of journey I see. And we talk about form and freedom on EFC, one of my main courses. And it's been a theme on this podcast. We've had people on who are really form-based people, martial arts, yoga. And then we have the people who are more kind of, just like you're saying, intuitive or expressive and the feeling side of things. And often there is a journey from one to the other, usually in the direction of freedom, but not always. I put a post up a few months back in a big yoga community online comparing yoga to BDSM. And people freaked the fuck out. People got really upset. Because there was this whole sort of blindfold yoga thing going around. And I've always thought, being told what to do, it's quite military, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? It's a bit kinky, someone telling you exactly what to do, and you're sweaty and you've got your ass up in the air, and, short of spanking you, kind of, it is a pretty similar experience, And also there's a way in which I see yogis punishing themselves in maybe not so healthy ways.
Totally.
Like her,
pushing them. Yes, totally. You're pushing off of your physical boundary.
So how is yoga like BDSM? Because I said this, and I said it actually with the greatest respect, actually more respect to BDSM than modern yoga in many ways. I said, look, we can really learn from this community. This is a smart community that understands many things. And, people that have really thought about this stuff for a long time. And the yoga people, a lot of them just freaked at me. So I'd love to hear you. Now, obviously, I could just be a pervert. That's entirely possible. But in what ways do you see the similarities between kink, BDSM, and yoga?
Yeah, going over your physical boundary a little bit, because it feels a little bit good to push yourself. This is, I guess, maybe like a core thing that's going throughout. But it is a little bit sexy, actually. Yeah, it's totally sexy. This high, intense energy. Yeah, maybe that's the thing. But then the more we look into different kinds of yoga, of course, there's so many different expressions. There's the more military kind of aspects of yoga, and then there's the more kind of extreme, sadism in BDSM, which is more kind of rough and very violent, I guess you could say. This is the stuff that feels extreme. I would compare that to Ashtanga, I would compare that to more extreme forms of yoga.
I was in a hot yoga class, and I felt like I had a mask on my face. I couldn't breathe. It's like I might as well have a gimp ball in my mouth. It's like, and I was like, wow, this is a very parallel experience. I'm probably feeling. Never mind.
Totally.
So I definitely saw the parallels, and it seems to me like both modern intense vinyasa style hot yoga is a way to feel when people are numb. And I wonder, and it's potentially addictive for that reason. I wonder if BDSM doesn't also have that intensity of feeling, which is like a way to feel alive. And I wonder if that couldn't come from a unhealthy, disembodied place as well as a healthy one.
Totally. Yeah, I thought a lot about this. Yeah, I thought a lot about this journey because, yeah, for sure. I feel like with anything, it's about intention. I think, I feel like if you're going to go, if you start on the yoga mat with the intention of getting abs, and you don't think for a second that you'll be persuaded by any of the mantras and any of the more kind of esoteric embodied way of looking at that practice, you're gonna get that anyway, you know. And I feel like with BDSM, if you feel like you just want a sensational experience that's something kind of fun to look at or fun to watch, and you don't want to go anywhere deeper with it or have any kind of emotional process, it's going to happen eventually if you start doing it right. But yeah, I do fear that there is a surface level of just wanting to like experience high intense pain with no intention. Yeah, for sure.
I want to feel anything, you know, that thing of like, you know, numbness is obviously a trauma symptom that's pretty common. That disembodiment, and it's like a way of coming back to the body when you're totally disembodied. And I can see the attraction of that as someone that used to self-harm a little bit as a teenager. You know, that intense feeling was like, this is better than feeling nothing. And when I'm in this intense feeling, there's also that meditative aspect of like, you know, if something stings, whether it's an Aikido wrist lock or a yoga stretch or a slap on the ass, you're in the present moment, right? It's like, it's very difficult to be thinking about your problems with your accountant when, I don't know, what is something you might do? Hit me with a birch branch or something. So it's you see what I mean? I'm thinking of a Russian massage I had, actually. I was in a Russian sauna, and these big Russian men were just hitting my ass with these birch branches, and I was like,
oh my God, I'm so jealous.
You're so jealous. Like, you look at you're probably turned on. And I was like, this is so gay, and I can't say that because it's Russia. It was just this big Russian
God, I'm
guy
so into that.
me up the ass. Anyway, I'm not sure if the listeners want to hear about these adventures. So yeah, say something about that, like being forced or the come into the present moment with the intensity of any of these things we're talking about.
For sure. I feel like there's a huge difference between kink and bondage, and maybe something that I like to call ecstatic BDSM, which feels more about BDSM with intention and using a lot of communication. And there's this kind of romantic idea that kink is this kind of like really kind of gone with the wind, kind of this like passionate scene where nobody speaks to each other, and it's this like eyes wide shut kind of feeling. And it's like
it's quite planned though, isn't it? You've got to be like, this is the one thing that doesn't appeal to me about it, is you have to be quite organized. There's a sort of like, well, what's the line, and is this okay, and safety words, and it's quite I can see why the Germans like it. It's quite structured in a way.
For sure. But that, for me, that's where the interesting stuff is. If you can have that high intense energy with so much communication, like that's where the good stuff is. And it's really easy to just close your eyes and let somebody else do things to you. That doesn't help you come into yourself. That doesn't help you embody like your full self.
Yeah.
So for me, if I'm giving a session to somebody, it feels more true to me to keep asking them what they want. Because sure, they probably have no idea at the beginning, but they probably have some idea by the end because they're being forced to have
you're also teaching them to tune into themselves, right? Like that question, this is a great question for students, this is a great question with children, obviously a very different context. Be like, what do you want? Like, because that question tunes people in, because if their response is, well, I don't know, and your response, well, you're paying me, so what would you like? I just had a massage today, and you could tell the masseuse was quite surprised because I was quite specific. I was like, oh, there's this one muscle by the side of the shin. Can you really like run your thumb up and down that a few times?
Yes.
This wasn't used to people that knew what they wanted. And were able
she loved it, yeah.
Oh yeah, she thought it was a bit surprised, and then she was, and also, for me, is also a surrender to being open to whatever technique she's bringing, and just kind of not being too controlling in that is part of the surrender of a massage for me. And a good hard massage definitely, has that surrendered quality of a sub. Do you know what like? If you get a massage from some big ass Russian dude, just to come back to your favorite example, it's like there's a surrender in that, right? You should so come to Russia.
I really need to come to a Russian sauna. Well, that is BDSM.
There's a surrender in that, though, right? Of just of being like, okay, like that, and that's a beautiful embodied thing, particularly for sort of control freaks like me, people who kind of, their life's about command and control. That ability to kind of surrender into that experience is a pretty profound one, as well as to ask and, to the other side of things, right?
Yes, fully. And I think it's really important I think having this communication for me, as a female-bodied person, that was really fundamental to begin asking the bigger questions about myself as well. Like, what is it that I want? Or realizing that I'd never been with someone who enabled me to have that experience of being able to say what I wanted. And also, is that have I self-victimized myself as a woman by not saying what I want, rather than expecting my partner to ask me what I want, you know? So
Okay.
yeah, a little bit complex.
You've inspired me here. Let's go to some maybe controversial territory, but how is it, you know, the kind of feminist perspective on this to step into a submissive position for a woman? Because my experience is many partners have a kind of subby side, even if it's not, you know, full on BDSM. And I'd say the majority of female partners I've been with, not all, but certainly the majority, and it might just be me, but it seems to be when I talk to female friends who I'm not in relationship with similar, and it's almost like a guilt about that.
For sure, yeah, God, yeah, this is interesting for me. Yeah.
And for men to be dominant too, right? I've done a lot of work with young Scandinavian men who are like, oh, I feel really bad that I want to be in control. Hang on. This is an aesthetic thing, as long as it's consensual and it's not a political thing. So how do you relate in this kind of modern political context to these extremes of what could be considered gender roles?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. That's a big one. I'm really happy to unpack that. Yeah, see, this is where I get a little bit, because I have some female-bodied or female-identifying clients anyway, who are professional dominatrixes. You know, they're for a living, they have to be dominant, or for a living they have to be dominant in their world. Like, I had a female client for my leatherwork who's a lawyer, and she said, I cannot look feminine, you know, I cannot look submissive. And it was this, and it kind of, I don't appreciate this connection that to be a feminist, you have to embody all of the traits of the toxic masculine, or, you know, all of this. For me, this begins to get a little bit like ironic that, you know, like, in order to be a feminist, you have to be a man. So and also I don't feel like they're connected either. I don't feel like femininity has to be, should not be connected with submissive either.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there is a little bit of funny little shame around being if you say that you're a sub. I feel like in the feminist world, everybody kind of wants to pretend that we're all just being in our solar, in our like positive masculine place, but we're not. I mean, we all have both parts of us, both men and women. That's really important to give that space.
Is it addictive? Now, another thing is I'm noticing your tattoos today as well. Like, you've got some awesome big tattoos, and like a few of my friends who have tattoos, again, the intensity of the experience is something they talk about. The sensation, the coming back to the moment. And so they've also told me it can be quite addictive, and I'm wondering if there's parallels there between tattoos, the BDSM stuff, the intense yoga. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, definitely, that's the thing. For sure, it's totally addictive. I think it's all the same. It's this search for high intensity and to kind of numb the noise. Yeah, like you said, it's perhaps the most disembodied thing we can do is to not look at our feelings, to, you know, look outside of ourselves and distract from what's really going on. And then it's a thin line. And also at the same time, if you go into something at high intensity with intention. So when I do get tattoos, I see it more like a ritual, and it feels much more of an emotional process for me. When I was getting my throat tattoos, I was, you know, crying all the way through it, and I was, he gave me space to really let loose, and So I think that's about awareness of being able to look at your feelings when you're in that disembodied place. In a way, like, I think it can be both. It can be destructive. It can also be very confronting too. Yeah.
And you've touched on this a couple of times. Let's go straight into it. So BDSM, kink can be a path that simply could be kind of, you know, I want to feel intensity, the high to numb out, to get over the numbing and to get over the noise of the head. Totally get that. Wouldn't blame anyone for that. But, you know, it does seem to have some potential unhealthy and addictive potentials. But you've also talked about this as a real path to growth. So what makes BDSM a path to growth as opposed to merely just a sort of fun recreational activity, like a thing you do as a hobby because it feels good? Like, what makes a path to growth?
With this demand for clear communication at all times, I feel like it deepens your relationship with yourself. It deepens your relationship with whoever you're engaging in that activity with. Whether that's what you're looking for or not, it's going to deepen your relationship with that person to a different place where you can't not see each other, because you have to be so clear with your communication. I think it's an emboldening tool to have, for sure. Yeah, I think that's where the therapeutic element of kink is this this deepening. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, to some extent. I'm just trying to kind of, because I think it applies to so many things. Like, yoga can be a path to growth, or it can be stretching. Martial arts can be fighting, or it can be a path to growth. There's so many things that can have that path to growth. And I love hearing from people that are really interested in it as whatever the art is as a path to growth. And what makes it that? Like, what is the, you used to talk about intention being a major one earlier. It makes sense to me that communication has to be such a part of it. There's physicality is right there. And there's a way in which when I first met you, you were kind of vivid. It's like, I used to get this a lot when I was doing a lot of martial arts, very intense martial arts. It's almost like you're more there. Little children look at you. And it was like, now, even if you'd been dressed in Lululemon, I suspect you would have still stood out in a way. There's that sort of vividness because you're on an edge. Do you know what I mean? It's like when I came back from war zones, or I was doing a lot of martial arts, there's a way in which being on that edge creates a sort of aliveness or a vividness of being. Do you know what I'm talking about here?
For sure. Yeah, that frames the question a lot better for me, actually. Yeah, I feel like whether I'm receiving or giving a BDSM experience, I feel like I'm very much brought to this edge of presence where you basically have to be fully present right then, and being brought into this full presence from something physical happening. That's really intense. I'm not sure what other things I have in my life that bring me into that sharpness of presence so immediately as this very cause it's quite dangerous now as well. It's not just high intensity because it's sexual, and in fact most of the engagement, most of the experiences that I have in this space, in this more kink positive space, most of the time aren't even highly sexual. It feels more therapeutic for me. Or that it just feels more like an experience. It's not necessarily something before or after penetration or anything like this. I feel like for me the high intensity comes from the fact that it's dangerous. If I'm receiving,
and that high, I've definitely talked to soldiers and other people who have these sort of actual danger or perceived danger, and there's a high to that. And again, I think that can be addictive. It can be hard to come back from these places. I remember once I had an experience of being I was back in Birmingham after I'd been somewhere in deepest, darkest Africa that was pretty rough, And I was longing for the intensity again. I was walking around like staring at big black guys trying to start fights and stuff, because I did. Luckily nobody took me up on the offer. But for a day or two, I remember just wanting that intensity of life. And this is where soldiers do second tours of duty when the first one traumatizes them. So I think there are some real dangers here in the pursuit of the vivid. That'd be a great book title, wouldn't it? The Pursuit of the Vivid.
Yeah, that's real good. I'm into that. I feel like that would be my autobiography.
Okay, well, I'll give you that one for free then. As long as I get a thank you in the book, I don't mind. So, The Pursuit of the Vivid by Melissa Tofton.
No, I feel like that would have been the title of my autobiography, 2 years ago for sure. It feels like I've gone into a more softer place because I had this realization that there is this search for this high intensity, ecstatic experience. How do you come back to a place of appreciating softness? And if you want to use tantra terms, but I guess I'm pretty allergic to the whole masculine and feminine terms, but I'm sure you know what I mean when I
like yin and yang. I find yin and yang much more kind of neutral, much less upsetting to people. So
totally.
It seems to me like you're much more yin than last time I saw you, like with the dance work you've been doing, and you've been intimidating the first time I met you. And if you don't mind me saying, you seem more open. As I said, you've been following intuitive movement, and it sounds like your practice has shifted quite a lot in the last couple of years.
Yeah. Thank you for the invitation to use those words. They feel a lot more kind, and they feel better words to use. For sure, I feel like this yin, having this deep appreciation for yin, has been really transformative in the same ways that BDSM and that high intensity and that Ashtanga and that kind of accomplishment place that I was in was really fundamental for the process. But now being able to appreciate the softness and the subtleties, and choosing not to listen to music, choosing to anti-stimulate, choosing to fast, and choosing to do things that are the opposite of stimulate.
Slow, dark, quiet, less. Yeah, and in the beauty of the yin, like I love a really dark, quiet. I was in this sauna in Finland once, and it was just dark and quiet, and no one was speaking, and it was amazing. And after all this gang activity running around the world teaching, it was just the best thing. I still remember it was just the depth of it, and just no one was speaking. It would have been a sin to speak in there. And you're not socially enforced. You just felt it, that you were so deep. You were like in a cave, It was primal. But another one of my sauna experiences. We're developing a theme tonight. So.
And I really love the sauna as well, so I really appreciate that parallel.
Another kind of intense thing, isn't it? But so I feel like with this yin and yang, sometimes people have a path, don't they, where they need to really go one way to go the other. And for me, it was like people said I was at my softest and most nicest and most pleasant when I was cage fighting every day, and other people just need to really reclaim their power, and they get into like hardcore yoga. I see a lot of that in yoga, people that have kind of come from being a bit passive and they're learning to sort of firm up. And then people go the other way, and then after they swing after a few years of martial arts to doing kind of really soft stuff, or 5 rhythms, or a more yin martial art like Sistema or something. So I've really seen that. Maybe you can tell me, is there truth in the sort of stereotype of the powerful businessman who likes to be sort of tied up and be a baby, or the sort of the submissive secretary who becomes a dominatrix? I mean, these are total stereotypes, but is there any truth in those? Like people balancing themselves?
Totally. Yeah. And I feel like that's great. That's great that people have realized that they're one way, that the way they relate to the world is one way, and the way that they like to be related to is another thing. And even that's a form of embodiment, like noticing that there's something that you want to experience. Yeah. Going to a professional who can give you that experience. Yeah. That I think is a huge step. I feel like when I see a client for the first time and I think, well, you've realized what you want in the world. That's great. Like that's so much more than some other people even realize by distracting themselves. Yeah. That's awesome, but it's totally typical for sure.
Okay, so this is the one instance in my life where porn hasn't lied. That there is some sense that that's still true. Okay, and in terms of a session, like you talk about these sessions and working with clients, like what does that look like? So I can imagine, listeners, we're corrupting the innocence of some of our listeners' tender earlobes with this podcast. I'm sure some of them are wanting it to be more extreme, but so what is that?
Very sorry on both accounts.
both accounts. We'll do better next time. So what does that look like? What does that look like, a session? How does someone come to you? What do they contract with you around? How does that work?
I guess it would just look like, I guess you could technically call it a ritual, in that it has a very strict beginning and end. And it would usually involve a bunch of body work, mostly kind of bringing somebody into presence, and a lot of massage. I even did some acro yoga with somebody before whipping them, and found that really interesting to have this kind of dialogue of bringing somebody into their body by using a bodywork tool, and then allowing them to drop deeper into their body by having an ecstatic physical experience. Yeah, so just a mix of body work and a mix of maybe a little bit of rope. Maybe I might tie somebody up and spin them around, and then just.
I feel like when I'm doing one of my really straight-laced business trainings, I should just bring you along one day, and with the rope and the whips and the tattoos, and just unleash you on an unsuspecting business. Just leave the room. They're all yours. High five. just to see what you do with them. But you know, joking aside, I can imagine anyone learning a huge amount about how they relate to fear and power and control and the communication stuff. Do you know what I mean? Like that's a hell of a personal growth workshop. I know that's probably not on most people's minds when they think about this stuff. It's a sort of accidental side benefit maybe. But I mean, you could do a whole workshop on that, right? Like as a kind of this sort of BDSM for normal people for personal growth. You know, there's a...
For sure. Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that idea.
You've got mainstream now, right? Like I was, you know, 50 Shades of Grey came out, terrible book as it is. I mean, I was just on the train. I'm surrounded by women reading pornography about like some BDSM shit. I was like, wow, like that wouldn't have happened 10 years ago. I mean, maybe in Berlin, maybe in Brighton in the nighttime, maybe in San Francisco, but it's got pretty normal now.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah. I feel like porn is getting more normalized now, which I feel really positive about. I feel like there's positive examples of pornography out there that empower female identifying people rather than disempowering them. And I think there's really positive examples of that.
Because like there's often this idea in the embodiment world, all porn is bad. You know, porn is just an addiction. It's a terrible thing. And it's really nice to hear someone say, well, it depends what kind of porn, right? It depends how it is. Like there's some out there that's beautifully artistic, that's empowered, that's, you know, on so many levels, just could be a positive thing.
For sure. I feel like, there's some beautiful porn out there that's bringing more awareness about different kinds of bodies that you just wouldn't usually encounter. Maybe if you're a cisgender white person living in the countryside, perhaps you might not have sex with a transgender person, or perhaps get some kind of empathy about what it feels like to be in a less dogmatic body form. And that's so wonderful to be able to.
Could you recommend? We won't be able to link to them just because of what it will do to our Google kind of stuff on the website. It will just destroy us. But maybe you could mention a couple of things for people to sort of point people to if they're wanting something a bit more positive in that domain. Yeah,
I'd love that. I want to talk about my friend Bex. She has a company called A Four-Chambered Heart. And it's just wonderful, just really boundary pushing, visually beautiful erotic cinemascapes. And she, they use a lot of beautiful, less dogmatic bodies, and really transforming how we see the idea of sexuality, that it can just be an expression of self. And really good stuff.
I think that's one of your friends It's one of your friends I've been trying to get on the show, so I may have a conscious embodied porn star on the show at some point, just to titillate the listeners with that. I'm sure some people will be shocked by this point. Some people will be wanting more, as I said. But I felt like, you know what, this is a topic which is super interesting. It does relate directly to so many embodied themes. And, I definitely wanted to have you on the show to kind of put it out there. There's loads more we can talk about. One theme of the show is culture. That's a real theme of the show, like embodiment and culture. Now, you've from Manchester area, right? Northwest?
Yeah. So, just near Lincolnshire, actually. Yeah, not far from Manchester.
Well, American friends, if you can't understand her, that's why. So, so you're from the north. You've spent time in London, which is a different country. You're in Germany. You obviously have clients more around the world. Do you see any kind of cultural stuff coming up around this?
Super interesting. So a lot of my clients the last couple of years, people that have been buying the bondage accessories, have been from Saudi Arabia.
Interesting.
There's a
men,
huge
women,
client
both?
base there. Mainly female identifying people, and that's complex.
Say more. I want to hear about kinky Saudis.
Yeah, so apparently there's quite an underground fetish scene there. Which I've not experienced firsthand, but I have a friend who's also a designer that makes beautiful kind of embellished burqas, and she was telling me that there's like a huge fetish scene there, but that nobody talks about it. But I have a lot of clients from there, and nobody's asking for anything to be packaged with like secret packaging and anything like that. It's not seedy. And, you know, I get people from England like requesting for things to be super secret.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's quite interesting.
Well, they could probably just say it's for their horse when the lever arrives. I've heard there's a big sort of underwear lingerie scene in Iran, I've heard as well. And I wonder if kind of, not the most sex positive places in the world for sure. That's maybe I haven't heard actually, so we might explain. So you're coming from a point of view of sort of sex positivity, right? And can I just say what that is if people haven't heard that term?
Sex positivity, that your expression of sexuality is all good and all welcome in the world. That's what I see as sex positive. For something to be sex positive means that you can openly talk about the topic of sexuality, and for it to feel appropriate to talk about it.
And it's interesting, isn't it? It seems like we live in a sex positive world because there's sex and people have sex, and it's not like we're in Saudi Arabia or somewhere like that. However, I would still say we're not, Britain is not a sex positive culture in many ways. And I know there'll be people that won't like the fact that we've done this episode. They'll be like, well, that's not real embodiment. That's some Mark's being a pervert with his friend. Like that's not the... Get back to a nice session on Ashtanga yoga, please. So, I don't think there'll be too many, but I'd be very surprised if we didn't get a few people kind of, sending me a message on the Facebook group or whatever saying, that episode was not allowed. Maybe a spiritual tantra teacher, but not someone who whips men and sends Saudi Arabians leather goods.
I'm really happy about that though, because that's a stirring. Yeah, it's like if you can manage to stir someone up and they're having to look at why they feel drawn to shaming somebody for being honest. Like I'm just talking about sex as just being honest, right? Everybody has sex. So if somebody was angry about us talking about sex, then we've just helped them realize something about themselves that they might have not seen before. So that's quite good.
Almost certainly the biggest perverts out there. Okay, so lastly, a couple of things to finish. Like, what I want to talk about is aesthetics. Like, I'm sitting here in my grubby hoodie, you're looking gorgeous as ever, and your stuff that I see on Instagram is just amazing. I mean, the aesthetic quality.
Thank you.
You're an artist. There's no other way to say it. It's. So say something a little bit about the importance of aesthetics, because I feel like that. Sometimes when I go to sort of embodiment kind of groups, it's all about the internal world and everybody's just kind of badly dressed and not, or it's the opposite. It's just purely like a showy thing, like you'll see in modern like London yoga. It's just externally facing. So I wonder if there isn't a sort of depth aesthetics. Do you know what I mean by that?
Totally. Oh, I love that. Yeah. I was thinking about this the other day because sometimes I feel really guilty for wanting things to be beautiful, and finding a lot of profundity in the profane, like there's something being beautiful that's so superficial and sensational. But then again, aren't we helping somebody go somewhere by something being beautiful? And isn't that a really important way of arriving fully into the world, by being bold with visual expression? Is really important. Yeah. And I think it's just a really true immediate way of showing up in the world by considering how you're seen. And I think that's wonderful. But no, I was thinking about that the other day, because I do have this kind of like hippie guilt of feeling excited about making art. And I think, I feel like I have these two people inside of me that's a bit like, oh, do we want to be an artist? Do we want to put more things into the world? Or are we just going to do lots of spiritual self-work, and is that the only work that's going to happen? We're not going to put any more art into the world. And I think it's really, I think art is important. Like visual stimulus is true, and is a beautiful form of escapism, and a beautiful way of inspiring people. So why not care about it,
Yeah, I feel like the Renaissance idea of art is something which helps transcend people and improve people and brings out their more moral qualities, more ethical qualities. That integration of spirituality, aesthetics, and the kind of civic mindset. I feel like that which is very much present when I was, in Florence, for example. It's just a beautiful place, and it was very much in the Renaissance mindset. That was the birth of Western civilization, was through aesthetics as much as through science or religion or anything else. I think it has a huge importance. I also see a way in which people can use their own physical beauty, enhancing that in their dress, clothes, tattoos, etc., body practices, in a very egoic way, just to manipulate others and, boost their ego. But I also see a much smaller group of people who are using it really as a way of inspiring people. And that word's used so often, like inspirational quote, but really they're using it as a way to bring joy. They're using it as a way to make people think. They're using it as a way to just bring that quality to other people's day. Like, they're almost beautiful in service. We tend to think of beautiful as always egoic, like, I'm beautiful so I can get a nice girlfriend or whatever, and I've become increasingly interested in this aspect of things,
Totally. Yeah. I was thinking, because I feel drawn to kind of, with the thing that's kept me doing the art stuff, the more visual, pretty stuff, is that I feel like it's powerful. I feel like you can kind of squeeze mantras into someone's ears through the back door without them realizing it. You can kind of bring somebody around to a different way of thinking without them having even known that was the power of this tool, of something just pretty.
Well, it's powerful and it's attractive in the deepest sense, isn't it? In the way that spirituality is attractive. And actually, there's if people need a classical parallel for this, the Buddha actually caught his monks chanting in an ugly way. And he said, no, you should put the tunes, the chanting, in the kind of musical melodies that were popular at the time, so that it's beautiful and appealing to people. So that way they're attracted to the Dharma. And I'm thinking, okay, if even this sort of a celibate aesthetic monk is saying this, it's kind of like, why not?
Oh my God, I love that.
But, okay, we do need to spank this customer on the ass and head out the door. So last things, I love you, you're awesome. So last things, where can people, I really want people to see your stuff. So where can people find out more about you?
Oh, nice. Yeah. So my leather stuff can be seen online, and it's just my name, so it's just Melissa Tofton. You can find me everywhere.
And that's double STOFTEN, yeah?
Yeah.
So MMLISSA Tofton, TOFTON, leather, melissatoftonleather.com.
Yes, that's me.
And oh my God, the front page already is beautiful. Look at that. Look, this is just so much more attractive than my website. Okay. I'm going to be sending my web designer notes immediately saying, why isn't my website this beautiful? And your Instagram's worth a look as well, isn't it?
Yes, please. Yeah, I feel like that's where I spend most of my time, kind of being more authentic. It's more interesting on there. Yeah.
Okay. So I'll link to that as well. I'm just bringing that up now so I can tell people it, because not everybody sees the links. So I want to actually say that now. It's so where your actual Instagram comes out first. So it's the same thing, at Melissa Tofton Leather. Yeah, it's the same Instagram. Yeah. Okay, so I'll link to both of those. Great. And do you have any final message about the body to our listeners?
No, I think we covered everything. Yeah, I think just be the sexy you wish to see in the world.
Nice one. Thank you. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to get more. If you'd like to help us build the Embodied Tribe, leave a review on iTunes or share this on your social media. If you're interested in training globally, sign up to receive the newsletter at embodiedfacilitator.com. Until next time, welcome home to the body.